Hi, and welcome to this masterclass, take two on multi-generational communication and how we can handle the icky, sticky problem or challenge in workplaces today of having multiple people from all sorts of generations in the workplace at once. I'm your host, AJ, Alexandra Joy, and it's always a delight to bring these little mini masterclasses to you. I love doing these because I think sometimes we just need a bit of bite-sized learning or a little reminder of some of the ways we can communicate and relate better in the workplace. Today's masterclass is going to be jam-packed with a few fun things, as well as some tips and ideas. And I'd love you to pause the recording, think about it for yourself, try some of the things out. And also at the very end, I'm going to be sharing with you a little tool or resource that you can take away that might just give you some prompts and ideas for how you can continue to work and play even better. So the masterclass, as I said, is called Mastering Multi-Generational Communications. Nice mouthful, hey? And as I said, it is all about specifically communication, not necessarily how to recruit and hire the best people or any of that sort of thing. It's about how can we communicate and relate with each other in the best way possible. I always like to begin by paying my respects to traditional custodians of the land on which we're on. And I'm on Wonnarua and Darkinjung land in particular, and I want to pay my respects to all elders past, present, and emerging. Let's go into a little bit of like the agenda for the day and what I hope to cover for you. And that's a bit about why do we even need these different ways of communicating? And are the generations really that big a deal? Is it really the challenge that we think it's going to be? Now, I'd love people who are listening here live. I know some people will be listening to the recording, but feel free to utilize the chat box to share with me your thoughts along the way, and I will keep my eye on the chat. So if you see me looking across, I'm going to be just checking in. So feel free. I'd love to know some of your experiences as well. So a little bit about why generations are different. What do we need to do? A bit of some of the gaps that might be between the different generations and how that may be causing some issues, some tools and templates, and just ways you can start thinking about communicating differently or maybe amending some of the ways that you're doing that communication now, and some ideas for improving the cross-generational leadership and communication. So what can we do to improve? So have you ever felt like you needed a bit of a translator between you and someone who was either 10 years your junior or 10 years your senior? I'd love to hear. Chat in the chat box for me. Have you ever felt like you needed a translator, or have you ever been a bit miffed or confused and thought, I'm not quite sure what they're talking about? Let me know. And also for those who are watching live, can you just let me know if you can see my screen okay, if you're actually seeing the presentation okay? Great, thank you. Thanks for the thumbs up. Thanks, Beck. Yeah, so quite often we can feel like, are we speaking a different language when we're talking to other people? What is it that they're actually meaning? Is it double Dutch? Maybe it's some of the acronyms and code words and things, you know, LOL is pretty common these days, but there's all sorts of new ones emerging all the time that people are like, I don't even know exactly what they're talking about. And so quite often this is comments that get shared with me by people in all the different kinds of workplaces that I go into. And really, I want you to think about, firstly, what generation are you? You potentially already know that, but maybe you don't already. So here on the screen are some of the kind of broad generations that we're talking about. So we have the traditionalists that are born before 1946, and some of those are still in workplaces, are still company owners, those sorts of things as well. We've got our baby boomers, 1946 to 64. We have our Gen X, 65 to 1980. That's where I neatly sit. grey hair included. So I'm a Gen X, smack bang in the middle right now. Maybe you're a millennial and you're born between 1981 and 1996. Or perhaps you're all a Generation Z, a Gen Z, 1997 to present. So I'd love to know, can you share with me in the chat box, which generation are you? Are you aware which one you are? It'd be good to know. So yeah, as I said, okay, so I'm amongst friends here. I've got I've got Gen Xers here with me on the line. So hello to you, friends. And maybe it's going to make our communication super easy because we're like, yeah, we just get it. But what I like to think about as I look across the generations and I see these different years that they were born is that quite often how people respond, how people communicate in the workplace is coming from what was going on when they were born. So when you think about it, our first formative years, those first 7 years that we're alive, so not necessarily thinking about your first years in the workplace, but the first 7 years that you're actually alive, what was going on in the world at that time, right? So you think about traditionalists and baby boomers, they've actually lived through world wars, they've lived through depressions, they've lived through really challenging economic times. They've also seen things like the advent, of color television and, radio and the motor vehicle and all sorts of things like that. They saw the changes where it became production lines and all of those sorts of things. You think about Gen Xers, they've really been born into an era where we started to see home computers just starting, Commodore 64s and all of those sorts of things. Also Vietnam War and some of those things that were going on. And so when you think about what was going on in the world, we saw a lot of more freedom, I guess, more freedom of sexual expression and all of those sorts of things in Gen X. And you think about today with Gen Zs, they have no idea what the world was like when we used to have a telephone that you picked up at home. They have no idea what a world was like without a smart device in your hand. They have no idea what it's like to do a school or a university assignment without a ChatGPT or Google to go and find that information. They just don't really need to go to the library like we did and go and get books off the shelf and actually go through that. So what I find in the workplace is people's communication and their communication styles is shaped really greatly by what they saw in the era that they were born. What was characterized, what were the main things going on in the world? And that's really shaped their worldview of what's important, what's possible, how do people communicate and relate. So now I know I'm amongst friends with Gen Xers, but hello to anyone watching, whatever generation you are from. I'd love to hear in the chat box if you could pop a note for me. What generation do you find the hardest to communicate and collaborate with? Let me know. Which ones do you find the hardest to communicate and collaborate with? And whilst you're sharing, I thought I would share. I facilitate, I run leadership development, communication, and teamwork days a lot in organizations. And it was maybe 2 years ago, I did a workshop on a bit about communication and engagement at Facebook, at their Australasian headquarters, which was in Sydney. And I was really excited about going there. I worked with about 30 of their people. It was excellent and it was lots of fun. And we did a lot of interactive activities and those sorts of things. But I have to say, I found it one of the most challenging workshops I've ever done. And it was just simply because there were so many Gen Zs in the room. And they just had a different way of communicating and engaging. They had a very interesting, relaxed culture, different to a lot of the workplaces that I work with. And yeah, I'm just seeing other Gen Xers are saying Gen Zs as well, some of their challenges. And what I found was they had bean bags and things around the workshop space we were in. And so lots of them were on their phone a lot. And it wasn't necessarily that they were just communicating with friends, although that would have been a lot of it. But they were also looking up things I was saying, searching for information, sharing different things, Snapchatting what we were doing, all of that sort of thing as they lazed about on bean bags. And it was just such a different environment to what I was used to, with people more in kind of corporate boardrooms and training rooms and all of those sorts of things, where people are sitting up, where they appear more attentive. And at the end, they were all like, that was fantastic. And I learned so much. And when I got them up doing interactive things, they got into it. But it was just such a different environment to what I was used to. And so I found that really challenging. And I'm reading here, others are saying Gen Z as well. So it's just understanding that different generations communicate, relate, they want to act, they want to engage in workplaces in different ways as well. And I'm sure had I been a baby boomer, that would have even been more challenging. I potentially might have seen that as disrespectful had I been a baby boomer, right? Because it was just the divide between what people are used to in the workplace and how they were behaving would be quite different. And so let's play a little game of Guess Who. I want to give you a little quizzy challenge just for fun around generational icons and thinking about, can you guess the identity of some mystery people based on the clues that I'm going to give you? And these are very Aussie. So feel free to chat in the chat box, those who are here, and put your answers in. Let's see how we go. If you're watching at home later, see how you go, what score you get. So question number 1. Here's your first clue. Hello, possums. I am known for my outrageous glasses and my purple hair. Any guesses after clue 1? Yeah, it's a boomer. And can you guess who? You are correct. Clue 2, I'm an Aussie icon of satire, poking fun at the upper class. Yes, you got it. Yeah, everyone's got the answer. Clue number 3, my alter ego is a famous comedian who shaped Australian comedy for decades. And you are all correct. It is beautiful Barry Humphries as Dame Edna Everage. Well done. So you know your boomer trivia. Let's see how you go. Question 2. I was once the voice of a generation. Any guesses? My comeback album, Whispering Jack, made me an Australian legend. Yeah. We're guessing correctly. Well done to the viewers at home. And I've had farewell tours, but always seem to come back. And yes, Beck, you were correct. It's John Farnham, or Johnny, as we affectionately call him down under. All right. Question 3. I started out on a local sketch comedy show before becoming an international star. Any guesses? I took Australian culture to Hollywood with a famous 1986 film. Oh, you're on fire. Yeah, the chat box is on fire with the correct answers, and the picture might have been a clue. That's not a knife. This is a knife. Good old Paul Hogan, which is definitely smack bang in the middle of our Gen X generation. So no wonder, good guessing here. Let's try question 4. Before I wielded a hammer, I was on Home and Away. Before I wielded a hammer, I was on Home and Away. I became, oh, wow. We have some trivia geniuses here online. I became a global star as a Norse god in the Marvel universe, and I still call Byron Bay home, and sometimes you can even see him up there if you're around and about, despite my Hollywood success. And yes, you were 100% correct. That is Chris Hemsworth. All right, question 5. So we're moving up in the generations, as you'll see. So let's see how we go as we get to the younger generations. We became famous through funny skits on Instagram and TikTok, right? 2 of the big channels these days. We are tradies who turned influencers and represent Aussie humour online. No guesses yet in the chat box. Our viral videos capture the larrikin spirit for a new generation. No guesses. And maybe that's because we're all Gen Xers here online. The inspired unemployed. So Jack Steele and Matt Ford have risen to fame using TikTok and the new technology. As soon as I said TikTok, you are out. Hey, yeah. I'm rather partial to the old TikTok now myself. I like quick, short little things, and I follow a few people on there. All right, so well done on the quiz. As we can see, often generationally, we know the generational challenges, changes, and I guess social things of the generations before us and the one that we've lived in. But we're often a little bit more lagging in the newer generations, the ones that are up and coming. So isn't that interesting? And that's just food for thought in the workplace. It's neither right nor wrong, but it's food for thought. And so when we start thinking about why does this even matter? When you think about, the generational differences, so what, people have brought up in different eras and have maybe different hairstyles, different dress sense, but why would it really matter for communication, especially if your workplace is all speaking the same language? Why would that even matter? Well, if you look at the changes that have happened in the workforce, the generations of 2019, so we're only talking 6 years ago, right? We see the percentage of millennials and Gen X and the boomers and Gen Z. And now what we're seeing in 2025 is primarily workplaces are made up of millennials and Gen Z, right? So the shift is happening. And I know I feel my age every time I ever sit on a recruitment panel and see the applications come through for people applying for jobs. And I'm always like, how can they be applying for a job when they're born in 20,000 and something? It just seems weird to me. But now I'm like, well, they could be 20, 25 years old, of course. But quite often we forget how quickly all of that goes past us. And what we're seeing here is that we're seeing a real shift. So there are all 5 generations in the workplace now, and it's the first time in history that we've actually had 5 generations. We've typically only had 3. So now we're seeing 5 generations in the workplace, as some of our boomers and people of the older generations are staying in the workforce a bit longer. The retirement age has changed. And so what we're seeing now is kind of a shift in what's going on. And if you look at it, so what we're seeing now is only 19% baby boomers. And this is really interesting, right? It's really interesting because in the past, it used to be that the baby boomers were all in the senior leadership positions, and so really shaped the workplace. They really role modeled and shaped how we communicate and relate. And quite often we looked up to those leaders. What we're seeing now is a lot more young leaders, a lot more people who maybe typically are rising through the ranks, are moving into those positions much sooner and much earlier than what used to be. You know, it used to be you had to earn your stripes, you had to gradually climb up the ladder. And what we're seeing now is younger people being promoted, younger people starting their own companies and hiring lots of people like them. So we're seeing a real shift in the demographics of who owns companies, who leads them, and the makeup of the actual workforce as well. And so lots of changes for people in thinking about how does that work for me? How do I want to communicate and relate in a workplace is going to be different with all of these generations. What we're also seeing then is different communication channels. And it used to be that communication channels were just like email and phone. And even before email, a lot of it was just phone, right? And memo. If you're as old as me, perhaps you can remember paper memos where you used to write your memo out or type it out, print it, put it in a yellow craft envelope, and it would go through the internal mail, and then it would come back and you would get it like 3 days later, and then you'd read it and you'd reply or write something on it and send it back through the internal mail. I know that some of you who are also Gen Xers might remember that, and certainly baby boomers, I bet you do too. I even talk to people who say, remember when you used to get your pay in a little, envelope, a little yellow envelope, and not just directly in your bank account. It was actual payroll was working with physical money and having the armor guard truck come and payroll people actually putting people's pay into little slips. So when you think about all of those changes and you think about, well, communication's no different. It's like, should you use email now, or should you use some kind of Slack channel or some other kind of like WhatsApp group in your team? And how should we best communicate with each other? Should we meet over the phone, or is it all going to be Zoom now? And post-COVID world, lots of workforces and workplaces now primarily work from home. Lots of them do, and have maybe 1 or 2 landing days a week or a month or something like that. Should I go to someone's office and knock on the door, or is that considered the height of rudeness these days? And maybe you've experienced some of that. If you have, feel free to let me know in the chat. I always love to know people's actual experiences. But I think the best answer to these questions is not that it's a one size fits all. And it's going to be different in every industry. I mean, last week I was out west and working with a mining company. And so obviously a lot of that is actually face-to-face stand-up toolbox meetings. They're actually walking around on site. And so lots of different ways that they communicate there. But when you think about it, and especially white-collar jobs, so much has changed in the avenues and ways that we can communicate. So it might be a bit industry specific, can also be really specific to the culture. So a modern startup IT company is going to have a different culture to a traditional regulatory government body, right? And so it's not just generational that we're playing with here as managers, leaders. It's also that the workplace is different, that technology is different, how we communicate as society has changed. And so the research shows certain things, and I'm going to really grossly generalize here because it's what the research shows. But when you think about it, older generations in the workplace, the research shows, prefer meetings and they prefer phone calls. And they can't understand all this WhatsApping, texting back and forth. They're like, just pick up the phone and talk to me or walk into my office. They prefer meetings where there's structure, where there's an agenda, where there's minutes, where there's accountability afterwards, and they follow it up and they take that seriously. While what we're seeing with some of the younger generations is they tend to favor the instant messaging style things. They tend to prefer a Trello board or some kind of Teams sharing board where you have all of your projects and everyone can see what everyone's working on. And that while older workers are more accustomed to more formal communications, younger workers prefer short, sharp, casual bursts. Just tell me quick, give me an idea, throw it at me, and I'm good with that. I've heard some boomers who are leaders say to me, I don't understand why this generation thinks that if they're sick and not coming in for the day, that just texting sick, not coming in is enough. They're like, why aren't they calling? Why aren't they talking to someone? Why are they just texting that? And so we have to start understanding that in order to lead a multi-generational workforce, we have to start flexing our style and empathy. We have to have a commitment to inclusivity. And it really does require us to shut down some of our judgments where we're like, this is right or wrong, and start being more open-minded about how can we communicate better. I'd love anyone to share in the chat box. Are there any communication channels that you're now having to learn and get used to in your workplace that maybe you never had before? So what are some of the channels or the principal ways people are communicating in your workplace? Is it still face-to-face meetings? Is it still emails? Or are there other channels and things that you're using? So I'd love you to share in the chat box. And so looking at lots of people are primarily still using email and those sort of communication channels. When we look at some of the styles here and we look at what are their attitudes, again, gross generalizations, the research links are below, and I can share slides for anyone who's interested in looking up some of these research pieces. When we look at it, the preferences of traditionalists was formal letter or in person, very much like they used to send more formal letters and snail mail. I still love getting lumpy mail. It's such a treat to actually receive something in the mail, you know, cards and letters, not necessarily bills. But baby boomers, for example, in-person, telephone, email, if necessary. Generation X, my generation, email and text. We're quite heavy in that. We're quite used to that. Okay, I'm seeing some chats where, okay, great. You've got a baby boomer in your generation. Yeah. Who loves emails. Yeah. And you're used to more Teams, messages, phone chats, having conversation. Yeah. That real kind of conversational style engagement. I love that. And so when we think about it, different generations prefer different things. We've got millennials prefer text and social media and actually often are communicating with each other on things like Snapchat, on TikTok, right? They're actually using that as a communication mechanism, and that's why they're so comfortable with that. Gen Z, the same. They might prefer a FaceTime video chat and they prefer handheld devices. So they're not all sitting at a desk all the time. They're working mobile, on the road, on their phones, those sorts of things. And it's interesting though, I ran a workshop with a school group earlier this year. And what was interesting was they prefer their friends to message them, and they all had their location on their devices so they could see where their friends were and if their friends were in their location. And so they would actually go, oh, where are you? They'd look on their phones, work out their location, and maybe catch up if they were in person. And a lot of them actually said they like in person, but only with their close circle group, and that they took offense to other people messaging them, right? It was really interesting. Other things people in the chat box are saying, instant messaging and email is the preference of the team, right? And Teams, so using Microsoft Teams, obviously, as well. And haven't we become like heads on a screen? I mean, we're using Zoom here, but team chats and all of those sorts of things, and interacting as a group rather than having that dynamic of all being in the room together, actually all just communicating on screen. I also just worked with a cybersecurity team out in Dubbo a couple of weeks ago, and they were all over the country. And so it's really expanded opportunities for employment that when you think about it, traditionalists and baby boomers would have had employment within the area that they lived, whereas Gen Z and millennials tend to be dispersed all over the world or all over the country and are working in that way. Switching between different channels and tracking communication on one subject. Super tricky. I couldn't agree more, Janet. And people going, where did you send that? I know my team, we use Trello boards, we use instant messaging, and we use email. And all the time people will say, where was that file again? Oh, we use Google, right? Google shared files and Drive. And so they would be going, did I see that on an email, or was that in a text, or was that in Trello? And so we've agreed that we'll keep Trello as our one-stop shop for keeping the links to all the files and all the things like that. But we had to kind of work it out. And my own team are intergenerational. So the rest of my team are all younger than me. And so they're more used to some of those things, and they were like, oh, I'll just pop links in here. So I've had to amend my communication style to work best with them as well. And I think what it comes down to, despite all the different communication styles, is ultimately people want to feel psychologically safe. They want a level of psychological safety, and they want to be part of a tribe that is trusting, no matter where they work. So that ultimately is our goal as leaders, is excuse me, it's not about the channel, it's about, are people open, are they sharing, are they trusting? And what we can do is look at all of these different biases and all of these different ways of being because of our generational differences, but instead look at what is blocking collaboration. And often it is just assumptions or stereotypes. And we have been stereotyping just in the discussion here today, right? It's hard not to. But thinking about how could we drop some of that? Because, you know, people are people and all people are unique no matter what their background. So let's think about for a moment traditionalists and baby boomers. Just think in your own mind, what do you think are some of the stereotypes that we have of some of the older generations? And if you think about those for a moment, and sometimes it might be like, they're resistant to change, they don't know technology, they're slower to pick up new ideas. When we look at instead their superpowers and focus on strengths, we see that traditionalists have stability, they have amazing institutional knowledge, and they're really loyal. And baby boomers, for example, have really strong work ethics. They're great for opportunities like mentorship and mentoring other up and coming people. And they really have focused their leadership on experience. It's experience based. It was never go to uni, get a degree, and go straight into a master's or an MBA when boomers were of that earlier formative years of their career. They did it through earning their stripes, through working their way up the ladder. So they have this real experience-based leadership, which is huge in as far as the strengths that they bring. If you think about Gen Xers and what some of the challenges might be, and hail to all of us Gen Xers, we are pragmatic, we're good at problem solving, we're independent in our leadership style, and we've sought life-work balance. This is the first generation Gen Xers that cared about life-work balance, or maybe not cared, but started to actually fight for it and look for ways to achieve that balance, unlike our baby boomers before us. Some of the strengths of millennials: collaboration, their digital fluency is exceptional, and they really love purpose-driven work. There are a lot of startup companies and for-purpose organizations that were started by millennials. When you think of things like Thank You Water and a lot of those kind of companies, started by millennials. And then Gen Zs, amazing innovation, diversity, focus, adaptability. Like, they have grown up in an extremely fast-paced world. And it's interesting when I talk to several people of late who were Gen Zs and also millennials, they were commenting to me, and I found this really interesting. And it was actually a comment by a baby boomer in a session that I was running, where a baby boomer said that they find the new generations actually a bit, let's say, flaky. They just kind of commented that you want to change careers all the time. You're only staying for a year or two and you're gone again. And so you're not getting the organizational knowledge and you're just not as reliable. And it was super interesting because some of the millennials and the Gen Zs were saying, well, in your era, when you were first building your career, you could also afford a deposit on a house. And so you were more likely to settle down in a community or a region and have your home and start a family. And so you were more likely to stay in that secure employment because that was where you were building your life and your community. And they were saying, for many of us living in capital cities, and this was in Sydney, someone was saying it, they said, there's no way I can afford to buy a house here in Sydney. I am not going to be able to afford that. And so I am taking some of my funds to travel, to go around the world, to do exciting things. And so I'm looking for jobs that are going to pay me more, to give me more of that kind of income where I can do things, where I can enjoy my life and have experiences. And so it was really interesting hearing the generational differences and how that was impacting even their career choices, how long they stayed in a job, what opportunities and options that they were going to go for. And so it's all food for thought, right? It's all food for thought, and just thinking, what's been my experience and how have I grown up, and how has my era that I was born in shaped the way I work and the opportunities that I go for. But ultimately, as we start to kind of wrap up, I think at the end of the day, it's all about engagement. And what I see is that people want to love their work. They want to be engaged in something meaningful. They want their work to matter. They want to go home at the end of the day safe and feeling seen, heard, respected, and to have contributed. And so when we have people engaged, as the Gallup research here shows, we have lower absenteeism, the customer service is better, productivity is better, less safety incidents, and less turnover. So we see morale go up. And ultimately, we want to think about multi-generational communication and improving our communication so that we can improve all of those metrics. And if any of you are in HR or a leadership role, those metrics are going to really matter. And creating a workforce where people love coming to work and want to stay there really matters. We're not going to be able to measure in future as much the turnover and how much we keep people, because as we heard, we're going to see new generations moving around anyway. But what we want to do is get engagement. We want people to love their work, love coming to work, and feel like they matter. And that when they move on to other roles, they're going to share and talk about their experience at your workplace really favorably. And so I believe that the more reflective we are, the more effective we are. And so as a leader of my team, and hopefully you of yours, it's about reflecting on, who do I have in my mix? What kind of generations am I here playing in the sandpit with me at work? And how could I start to listen, feel into, interpret, ask, and improve the way that I communicate and relate? Because ultimately, we can only, firstly, change ourselves and our approach. And so one fundamental I truly believe is one size does not fit all, and that will fail. So you can't just say everything's on email or everything's got to be meetings where everyone has to come to the office every time. It comes down to knowing your team and not just cookie cuttering, but going, how do I model this and adapt it for my team? And every time you get a new team member, it's like that old Tuckerman model: forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning. You really need to think about every new team member. What era are they? What are some of their preferences? You'll have lots of people with different diverse ways of thinking and communicating. So really, I think it comes down to this: trust. And how do you spell trust? Ultimately, it's about building trust and respect in a team. I have specific ideas for how you spell trust. What do you think? Feel free to pop it in the chat box, anyone who's here online, and I'll have a look. How would you spell trust? And I'm not being cheeky as far as how it's written on the screen. How I believe you spell trust is that Time. And that ultimately it comes down to us as leaders spending time with our employees, helping them navigate, helping create an environment where they have the information in the manner that they need in order to do their best. So not setting people up for disaster, but setting them up for success. And that requires us to spend time. Some ideas for how we can be more inclusive is reverse mentoring, pairing some of the older generation people or senior leaders with some of the newer generation people. It is multi-generational collaboration. The more we can create like soup of putting them all together and allowing and sparking and celebrating the differences and allowing that to come out, even better. We want tailored motivation and engagement. How each generation will define that is going to be completely different. Yeah, as we're hearing in the chat box, listening to each team member, accommodating all preferences. Everyone's going to have different preferences and ways. We're going to have people who have different ways of thinking, people who are introvert, extrovert, all the sorts of different things, people at a distance when the rest of the team might be local. And so we really have to tailor it. We want to think about how do we get that knowledge transfer and succession planning going, and knowing that some of the newer generations may not want to stay as long. How do we prevent that expertise bleeding out? How do we ensure that we're keeping it and retaining it, or finding ways to pass it on and store it and support it in lots of ways? I'm getting lots of little chats. Yes, flexibility and openness, absolutely. Understanding Gen Z may need coaching, right? Remaking phone calls, absolutely. If that's something I often hear, is them not wanting to pick up the phone. And a Gen X or a baby boomer going, what do you mean? Just pick up the phone and talk to them. And they're like, I'll just text them and message them and then sit and wait. And then they'll say, oh, there's 3 dots, so they must be replying. And, you know, we often think, why don't you just pick up the phone? But every generation's different. So yes, maybe giving some coaching and support to people, having flexible work policies, right? Designing the structure and the way that we do things so that it appeals to all generations, so that really being cautious. Often policies have been written for a while, or think about who's writing the policy. Is it just one person or a couple of people who are all from the same generation? They're going to write a policy that reflects their values and their beliefs and their era. So we need to make sure that policies, when they're drafted as well, are run by different generations so that everyone can have a say and it can fit different needs. I have for you a little best practice multi-generational handout. It's a really simple 2-pager. It's just some prompters and might be a good thing to share with other leaders, you know, and it talks about all of these things. It talks about you having the right non-judgmental mindset, firstly, to customize individually, as we were all just chatting about, mixing the generations, as I was saying, because I really love the concept of not trying to round out an employee, but instead rounding out the team. You know, have a well-rounded team, but allow people to shine at what they're great at. Creating psychological safety no matter what, and it's now a legislative need here down under in Australia, in New South Wales in particular. We have legislation around psychological safety now, but I think beyond that, do it because you want to be a good human and a good leader, and you want to bring out the best of people. And so being a good role model is one of the ways that we can do that as well. So I'd love to hear from any of you in the chat box, and in a moment, for those who are on live, I'll pause the recording and we can have a dialogue and discussion and all come on the screen. But I'd love to hear, what might you do differently in communicating now? What are some of the things that this has just reminded you of? Maybe you were already thinking this way, but what might you do differently now? I know, as I was saying with my team, it's been finding different ways of using the technology differently. We also have team members who are overseas. So we've got a team member in Sri Lanka, and we have a team member, our designer is in Serbia. And so we also have different time zones to consider, and not giving someone something that's right at the end of their day, even if it's the start of ours, but really considering those sorts of things. I'm hearing established consistent way of using the communication channels. Yeah, and sometimes isn't that just having a conversation about it and going, what do people prefer? Okay, we've got these 5 things, but ultimately, can we choose one, or can we agree that for decisions, it'll be done on this channel? For general chit chat, it could be on this channel. Who needs to be in meetings? And I think I heard famously Steve Jobs used to really say, think about, if you're invited to a meeting, why you need to be there, and can you really contribute? And so apparently it was said that he would be in meetings with people, and he would actually single people out and go, why are you here in this meeting? And if it didn't really seem to add value or make sense, he'd be like, why are you here? You could go. And people would get up and leave, and he would be like, good, go and do something that's more useful for your time, right? So it's always just checking in and being considered, isn't it? It's thinking, are we doing this in the best way possible? Is it the most efficient? And just because we've always done it one way, is that going to be the best? So to wrap up, I just want to share a special end of financial year offer. If anyone who is watching this, it's before June 30, 2025, this can apply to you. We have a special end of financial year offer, 50% off on our 10-degree shift program, which is all about how you can be a really well, happy, whole leader. And then the manager to leader shift, which is specifically for corporates and teams who want to help their managers go to that next level of being a leader. It's an amazing program taken over several months and is great to do as a group if you've got people who you're really wanting to take on a journey of up-leveling. We have a special 50% off. There's a link there. So I will leave that for those of you who are watching before June 30, 2025. Thank you so much for being part of today's little mini masterclass. I hope you have gained some insight and some value from just reflecting, if anything, on some of those things. I deeply appreciate your time. I appreciate that this is just one communication channel. If you would like a copy of the handout that has some tips on best practice, feel free to reach out. For anyone who is here live on the call, we will be sure to forward you a copy of that. All the best with your multi-generational communication.